Hello, this is John Maggiore with Maggiore on Bowie.com. And I'm joined today with a very special guest, a man with whom I have some common interests, Nick Smart. Nick.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Nick. So
Hi.
Nick has many hats. He's an author, a photographer, a convention curator, which I'm going to ask him about, a magazine editor, a designer, and a teacher. He is the joint curator of the David Bowie World Fan Convention and the joint editor with Andy Jones of David Bowie Glamour Magazine, which will be the principal topic of our conversation today, and for which you see the cover of the most recent issue behind me. Beautiful cover. And he is the joint designer of that publication with Catherine Smart. So, Nick, thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleasure, John. Thanks for asking me on.
So, let me ask right off the bat, for those who are not familiar with it, those few that are not familiar with it, what is David Bowie Glamour Magazine?
Okay, so really, it's a magazine dreamed up by me and my uncle Andy towards the end of 2016. We talked for years about doing more in the Bowie world. We talked about doing a fanzine. We talked about maybe we get into sort of buying and selling memorabilia or something like that. And we talked like this for years, 30 years probably. And then eventually one day we were just having one of our conversations, and I said, "What about this magazine then? What about this fanzine? Shall we do it?" And he said, "Yeah, let's do it." And it just kind of the time was right. Andy was semi-retired. I was looking for something else to do on top of the sort of, my work as a teacher. And we just said, yeah, let's do it. And the weird thing was we had no idea how to make a magazine. If we'd known how little we knew about how to do it, we would never have started. I remember us having conversations at the beginning about, I remember Andy saying, "Have you got a colour photocopier at work? Could you do it on that?" And I was like, "Oh no, I don't think I could do that. I get into all sorts of trouble." So we just developed this idea from nothing, really. And I think what happened then was that was in the October of 2016. And in the same month, I went to a book signing by Woody Woodmansey, of course, the drummer from the Spiders from Mars in the early 70s. And I got Woody to sign a couple of books for me. I'd met him once or twice before because I've been to a couple of concerts and stuff and met him. And I mentioned this thing about the fanzine and said we were going to do it. And he said, "Well, if you want anything from me, let me know." And I thought, oh my gosh, Woody Woodmansey is actually sort of on board with this. So I thought we've got to do it now, So that was great. And then sort of one thing led to another. And a fella called Chris Jones contacted us, who was a fan. And he said, how are you doing this? How are you going to have it printed? Is it going to be litho? Is it going to be digital? I thought, well, I've literally no idea. I don't even know what you're talking about. So he was a designer. So he said, "I'll design it for you." We said, "Great." And so we just sort of put it out there on Twitter. My uncle Andy Jones had a Twitter following of about 5,000 at the time, based on his sort of, he's got a big Bowie collection.
Yeah.
So we had a bit of an audience there. So we put it out and said, send in your articles, send in your artwork, send in whatever you have if you're happy to be part of this. And we just started putting it together. Chris made it into a magazine. We interviewed some people. We got in touch with a few others. Woody put us in touch with somebody else. I think Mike Garson wrote the introduction to the first one. So what was really amazing was that everybody that we asked to do stuff, Bowie's sort of collaborators and friends, all just said yes. And these were people that we'd been watching for years in concert up on the stage there. I remember going to the 87 concerts when Carlos Alomar came out on the stage and sort of started shredding on the guitar. And now he was writing stuff for our fanzine. So yeah, it's just been amazing how people have just been really, really happy to contribute. And that's fans and Bowie's closest friends. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey.
I can't help but comment that story is a more successful parallel to what I'm doing with my blog. And I have found, when I tell somebody who's not a daily reader about it, one of the things that strikes me is how many people are agreeable to talking, and once they do, inevitably everybody likes talking about David Bowie.
Mm.
So
That's the great thing about the Bowie fandom, is that it is
yeah,
actually quite close knit, and everybody sort of helps each other out. So
yeah.
if somebody's doing something, everybody wants to says, "Yeah, I'll be a part of that." I'll everybody just helps each other out, and it's all, everything just keeps moving along. So it's really great.
So I ask this as somebody who writes about David Bowie every day.
Hmm.
um, how is it that David Bowie still commands an audience 8 years after he's dead, and it's not an audience that's hanging on; it's growing and thriving.
Mm.
Why David Bowie?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And people say to me, "Won't We've done 11 issues of the fanzine now, and of course, so much is written about Bowie generally, and people always say, aren't we going to run out of things to say about David Bowie? Hasn't it all been said? Haven't you spoken to everybody?" Um, and I say, what about William Shakespeare? He's been dead 400 years. We're still
Yeah,
finding stuff to say about that guy.
right.
So maybe Bowie's going to be in the same bracket. We don't know yet, but
Yeah,
and maybe it's for sort of people like you and me and all the fans that are sort of still focusing on Bowie to we've got a part in keeping that legacy going, really, and keeping talking about him, and keeping everything going. But I mean, coming back to your question, why Bowie? So why is it Bowie that we're doing this about? I kind of feel like for a lot of people, Bowie represents the outsider. A lot of people kind of say, a lot of people talk about that Starman moment where he's pointed at the camera on top of the
yeah,
pops and picked on
yeah,
you. And I kind of feel like, a lot of people felt like he made it okay to dress in a certain way, be in a certain way, have a certain sexuality, and it was all great and celebrated. And I think the other thing that Bowie did, and I've been writing about this a bit in my book, is up until that point in music, it felt like whoever was on the stage, whoever was written the songs, they were kind of expressing themselves. Bob Dylan was like the spokesman for a generation. He was saying things that were coming sort of deeply from within. Now, and then with glam rock, and particularly Bowie, it was theatre, it was artifice. And the person on the stage wasn't necessarily, they were portraying a role. Alice Cooper, all of them say it, they were portraying a character. And so it sort of became theatre again. And so that I felt was a real change when glam rock came along. And there were sort of two sides to glam rock, weren't there? Because there was sort of a teeny bop side with T-Rex and Sweet and stuff. And then there was sort of Roxy and maybe Alice Cooper and certainly Bowie, who were sort of a bit more art rock. But yeah, I kind of feel like it was just that sort of thing that he made it okay to be different.
yeah. Do you think that there's more of an interest in Bowie today than I don't want to say during his life, because that period that you're just describing now, there was an enormous amount of interest, but say um, 20 years ago, or the time between the let's say the mid 80s and the 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 next day, is there more interest in him now than then?
I'm going to say so. What do you think? I think
Look,
so.
I'm asking you in part because you know, maybe you're the wrong person to ask because we both wallow in David Bowie, right?
Yeah,
But it seems to me, and I don't want to do the talking, but I'll just say this
sure.
and see what you think. I think that somewhat like Marilyn Monroe or James Dean, he has transcended from being a rock
Mm,
star or a performer to being a cultural phenomenon. The lightning bolt has become part of our culture that people will recognize that they've never heard Aladdin sing or heard of Aladdin sing.
mm.
And I'm this is actually one of the topics that I don't want to say struggling with, but I'm trying to explore, in what I'm reading and what I'm writing, and like what happened. Well, what do you think? What happened? Well,
But
something
that's so
fading
interesting
down.
what you said about transcending time,
Yeah,
about those, Marilyn Monroe and James Dean figures, because that takes me back to Shakespeare again,
yeah,
where
right,
I can't remember who it was. I wish I could look it up quickly. Somebody whose name I should know said he was not of time. He was not
yeah,
of his time. He was of all time.
yeah,
And so it's interesting how we're looking at Bowie now, along with other figures from the kind of recent past and saying, are they sort of trapped in their time, or are they sort of have they transcended that now, and how are they moving on?
Yeah.
Because I was actually a little, like you say, it's interesting for us because we're immersed in this world of Bowie, and then sometimes it's hard to see how other people view it from outside. I found when we lost him back in 2016,
Yeah.
that I was actually a bit, there was, I don't know what it was like over there, but here in the UK, it was all over the news and the radio and the newspapers the next day, where it was everywhere. And I was a little surprised because I knew what he meant in my world.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite understand he was that level across the board. I don't think, I don't think I'd quite realised that he permeated the culture in quite the same way as he clearly did.
Well, I live in New York State, and he had been living both in New York City and in the Catskills, which is a rural area to the north of New York City, for the last 20 years of his life.
Mm.
I went down to I live in Albany, New York, which is north of New York City. And I went down to New York after he died, and the block where he lived had transformed into a gigantic shrine.
Mm.
And all New York City was celebrating David Bowie for a very long time after he passed away. But yeah, the New York Times, the newspaper, was running not just a news story about his death, but it had a feature where people could write in and write about what David Bowie meant to them.
Mm.
And it was publishing what people were writing in. And I don't remember that for anybody else. I don't remember that for any celebrity, any political leader that passed away.
Yeah.
It was really a cultural thing. It was not just a remembrance of a life.
Yeah, it was something that really permeated the culture and really sort of got under everyone's skin, wasn't it? So yeah, I think we really felt that loss.
Yeah.
Then.
So the fan magazine came about after he died.
Yeah, it did. And I sometimes think, maybe the reason it's been successful is that, some of the people that worked with him while he was live might have thought, I don't know, should we really talk to this fan magazine about David and, start talking about his life, without David's permission. Whereas, maybe it was the right time to start it when it sort of became sort of legacy rather than current. So yeah. But I have to mention as well, because I've mentioned everybody else, that picture behind you is painted by the amazing Helen Green, who is, I think, a big part of the fanzine's success as well, because having those amazing pictures on the front through 11 issues has made it.
Well, I was going to ask about that, and let me ask about. I'll ask it now. You just said who painted it, but tell us a little bit about the art, because really, for no other reason, the art by itself is a reason to look at this magazine. I mean, it's really beautiful and compelling. So, does she do all of the art, or do you have access to multiple artists?
So Helen does the cover. And then so she has done sort of bits of design for us as well, and just sort of advises on things a bit as well. She often helps me out with the proofreading because proofreading is always quite a big task. But in terms of the art, everything else from within either comes from fans who send it in, and there's a lot of great fan art that comes in. And some, photographs and stuff. One thing that we were worried about when we first started the fanzine was copyright. Would everything, what was it okay to use? Well, we kind of made sure we got permission for everything that we possibly could. But again, just like the musicians who worked with Bowie, the photographers that worked with Bowie, some of whom are sort of very sort of famous and well known in their fields themselves, have been great about sharing their work and allowing us to use it in the fanzine. I think because they know we don't really make any money out of the fanzine, it's kind of they feel quite good about it, and they know it's sort of a fan thing, So people have been happy to share, some of the greatest photographs of Bowie, which are artworks in their own right, and just allow us to use them in the pages of the fanzine, which has been amazing.
So you've mentioned the photographers, you've mentioned many of Bowie's collaborators. I think you have a partnership with davidbowie.com. So there's a kind of official Bowie land has embraced David Bowie Glamour Magazine. How in the world did that come about?
Yeah, that's just was absolutely great.
Yeah.
I mean, we never imagined that that the David Bowie official would sort of maybe even notice us, let alone sort of get involved and get engaged. And the other people who've been really good about getting the fans, are two David Bowie fan sites, David Bowie Wonderworld and David Bowie News.
Yeah.
And for our first 2 issues, I think it was they who put the word out for us. And then somebody who we interviewed for issue 3, I think it was, said, davidbowie.com might be interested in this, and put us in touch directly. And lo and behold, they did know about us, but they kind of respectfully thought, oh, maybe they don't want David Bowie official to put this out. Maybe they just want those fan sites that we'd already kind of hooked up with to do it. So they kind of respectfully kept their distance. And we kind of thought, oh, maybe they're a bit untouchable. And as it turned out, they were really happy to help us. And we were delighted to be included on, David Bowie's official website and his official media and everything. And so I think before we put issue 3 out, and we still had issue 1 and issue 2 available, they actually put it out on their media. And that was a great day when we were kind of Andy and I and Helen and Chris, who was designing at the time, were all kind of just like, we knew what time it was supposed to be going up on the website. We were kind of watching, and it hasn't come up for a few minutes, and then it came up on Facebook before it came up anywhere else. And I got Facebook and Andy hasn't, so I was kind of like, oh, it's up on Facebook. Yeah, it's just really exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, you mentioned when the first few issues were still available, and you don't reprint back issues once they run out. Why is that?
No. Well, it became clear that what happened, I suppose, was that they started commanding quite high prices on eBay.
Yeah.
Issue 1, I've seen one go for £210, Great British pounds, and often they go for 150 or more. And although we'd never printed them as limited editions initially, it was clear that people were valuing them as collector's items. And if we printed more, that would completely blow that out of the water for all those people who valued it in that way.
Yeah, okay.
But it was a kind of a weird one, because on the one hand, we were thinking that's going to spoil it as a collector's item for those who regard it as that. On the other hand, we were thinking we don't really want fans to have to pay £200 odd to access this stuff. So what are we going to do? So what we did in the end was we committed to not reprinting them, but we collected issues 1, 2, and 3 all together and made them into a book. And so, we've never said we'd never, we wouldn't reprint that. So we would reprint that if it was needed. So it can be accessed that way. So now fans can get it for a reasonable price if they like, but also there's still the collector's item for the early ones.
Wow. Okay. So you're mentioning the fans, who are of course the consumer, but they're also the co-creators. So the magazine is by fans and for fans, and you talked about this a little bit. So when, as an editor, when you're evaluating fan submissions, what are your criteria? How do you solicit contributions, and then how do you evaluate them, and what makes the cut, what doesn't?
Well, the first thing is, we're not bothered if people feel they're a good writer, or what's really important is what they've got to say or what they've got to put across. If they've had a great experience, maybe sort of close encounter with David Bowie, we want to know about it. We don't want people to be held back by thinking, oh, I don't know if my writing's good enough for this, because we can work with them on that. I can talk to them and sort of shape it the way they want it, and sort of put some input into that if they want it. But the thing is, have you got a story? Have you got something that that other fans would read and think, and put themselves in their shoes and think, oh, imagine I've been in that situation. That person's a fan like me, and yet they've sort of, they've met David Bowie and they've had this experience. Obviously, not all the content is about meeting David Bowie, but if there's some kind of thing that would spark with other fans, then that's the thing. And also that's why we still call it a fanzine. Some people receive it and kind of, the idea of a fanzine makes people think of the sort of photocopied things that you had with punk rock in the 70s and so on. We had Sniffing Glue over here, and there were lots of those, sort of really do-it-yourself sort of things. Ours is more like a kind of a coffee table, high spec, we kind of make it as high spec as we can. We print it on the best paper with the best processes. But we still call it a fanzine, not because it's done by us who are fans, well, partly that, but also partly because at least half, probably more than half of the content that's in there is written by fans.
Yeah, well, just to reiterate what you just said, the look of the magazine does not look amateurish at all.
Thank you.
You said that, I was going to ask you, but you mentioned there's an aftermarket value to the old editions, but a copy of the magazine is suitable for framing, right, and putting on a wall. It's, as you could see again from the image behind me, which is an electronic image, but if it's beautiful. So
yeah,
so,
and a lot of the design that Kath does inside as well is just stunning, and also the fan art that gets sent in, which we can reproduce in on the best paper stock and with the best print processes, makes that look great as well. So yeah, you can buy a second copy and tear it apart and stick it on the wall.
So not everything's done by fans, and you mentioned some of the art, but also you mentioned some of the interviews. And if you look at the back issues, there are they are replete with interviews. And who conducts those? And you mentioned sort of the very beginnings, but some of the issues have themes. So how are those interviews curated? How are they cultivated? How do you get all these subjects to agree?
Yeah, well, I mean, literally, we asked them, and they're so great about saying yeah. So we've built up quite an address book, I guess, of people who've worked with Bowie over many years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we were able to. I know we're going to talk about the convention a bit later, but that's why we were able to do a convention, really, because we had this address book and we were able to get in touch with all of these people. So yeah, I mean, it's. Sometimes we're looking around, just trying it. We're going, oh, wouldn't it be great to be interviewed such and such person? So you're looking for social media. You're going on their website. Sometimes people have their contact details on the website, but quite sort of well hidden. So if you really look, you can find it. Other people are really happy to be contacted, and they've just got contact details on their website. And then lots of times, because we get to know somebody and we interview one person, then we might say to them, oh, it'd be great if we could interview this other person who we think you might know, and often they'll put us in touch, and things will happen that way.
So you mentioned the convention. What does it mean to curate a convention, and what can you tell us about the Bowie World Fan Convention?
Okay, so well, first of all, Andy and I did the Liverpool convention in 2022, and the New York convention in 2023, but we weren't involved in the more recent one, Liverpool, this year. But we've got other things going on, which hopefully, if I can come and speak to you another time, there'll be a bit more I can tell you about it. But yeah, I mean, that was really what it was. What happened was that Andy, who works with me on the fanzine, my uncle, put out a tweet, and it said, wouldn't it be great if there were Bowie conventions? There hadn't really been. There had been one in 1983 in London, and one or two other small things, but great. There've been some great stuff going on in the past, but they, just like fanzines used to happen and didn't anymore, conventions used to happen and weren't anymore. And a fellow called Dave Picciolinghi, who was part of Sound City, responded to that, and they've got experience with putting on shows and bands and all sorts of different events. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So we had a chat, and he was a big fan. And yeah, so then we were suddenly just straight into, right, who should we have? Who are we going to ask? And the great thing was about certainly the first convention that we did was that we had somebody from every era, really, of Bowie's fame. well, even before, I suppose, because we had John Cambridge, who was the drummer in The Hype before Bowie made it. Then we had Woody Woodmansey was there, Carlos Alomar and Robin Clark, Donny McCaslin. Yeah, it was just a load of photographers as well. Dennis O'Regan was there and Duffy Archive. So Jonathan Barnbrook was there, the record sleeve designer of The Next Day and Blackstar and Reality and others. So yeah, so we had a great mix of people there, really. Gail Ann Dorsey, why did I not mention her? Yeah, she was there in Liverpool. So yeah, it was just fabulous. And then just before we went on, all of them sort of gathered together for a photo, and Andy and I just sort of, without being asked, just kind of stood on one end and then the other. And we just had this great photo of all these guys that were going to be speaking at the convention, which was fab.
Do you expect, so the first was in Liverpool, the second was in New York, the third was in Liverpool, and I heard you say that you weren't involved with the third. Do you expect future locations to be in the United States? I have this theory, or just this guess, that Philadelphia would be a good site for.
That would be a great site, wouldn't it?
Yeah, especially next year's the 50th anniversary of Young Americans.
Yeah, that would be perfect, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
with the Philly, connection. Yes, I wish I could say more.
Yeah, okay. Just have to be closer to where I live than Liverpool.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about, I mentioned in passing that some of the issues of David Bowie Glamour are thematic. And I want to ask you about one in particular, which was the Blackstar issue, which I think was the 6th issue. And fifth.
Number 5, yeah.
Sorry about that. It is self-described as the most complete treatise on the album to date. And
that was my words. I hope I didn't over-egg it.
Well, no, but I do want to ask you to defend that. What are your observations, or what insights came out of that about Blackstar? And do you have an overarching theory? So if you're just familiar with the album, what would you learn from the magazine?
Well, I think the thing that was great about the magazine was that we interviewed every member of the band who was there at the time, and Tony Visconti, who actually Tony wrote the introduction to the fanzine for that one. But we heard from everybody who was involved in the musical creation of it. So that's really why I called it the most complete treatise, I guess, because we had the whole band. And the thing was that everyone had been asked to sign non-disclosure agreements, and so clearly there was a limit to what they were able to say, but then there was lots that they were able to say. They told us a lot about what Bowie was like in the studio, how kind of relaxed he was, how sort of methodical he was, how he'd sort of worked quite strict hours, and unlike when he was making Station to Station, for example, when he might have been up all night and sleeping all day, he was making the album during the day, and then sort of when it came to 5 or 6 p.m. then that was his family time, and he was off doing that. So and it was really clear, he would, from what everyone said, he was very relaxed in the studio, having a great time. In some senses, it seemed like it seemed like he knew his time was limited. In other senses, it kind of seemed like he was looking to the future and thinking about the next album and more ideas. And that album, I just think is amazing. I mean, I can't really think of it in a sort of continuum with other Bowie albums. And when I see things online where it sort of ranks Bowie albums from best to worst, I always think, how can you put Blackstar anywhere in there? I can't rank that alongside, Hunky Dory or Young Americans. Yeah. It just seems to stand apart for me. It just seems like a completely different beast that you can't even judge alongside the others, really. It's just I'm so glad. To me, it feels like a real masterpiece. I'm just glad that, that was the album he gave us at that point.
I don't mean for this to be an interview about Blackstar, but I'm going to ask you a couple more questions about it. I agree that it's a masterpiece. And it seems like, for those of us who are fans, Bowie made so much great music after the 70s. But I think for the casual fan, they're more familiar with him from that period, and they might have missed out on Heathen or Outside or Earthling. And it seemed like when he came back from his 10 years where he wasn't making albums, with The Next Day, which was a surprise, there was this sort of the surprise factor helped draw very positive attention to a very strong album. But then Blackstar comes out, and even take away the circumstances of its release. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It stands apart. It's a different level. It's a different thing. It's not even a rock album, right? And do you feel like there's almost this story that I think we fans tell ourselves about the rise and fall of David Bowie, but then does that final album does it serve as kind of his redemption? Does it cast what he did between the 70s and that point in a different light?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah, someone said it casts new light. I think it must have been Nicholas Pegg that said this, because he just writes the most beautiful prose, saying that it casts new light and new shadows on his previous work.
Yeah,
and yeah, in a sense, it stands apart, but then it's in some senses it kind of serves as a gateway, sort of back to that sort of that era where a lot of people lost touch with Bowie, and a lot of people who are really. I mean, I had to do a little bit of catching up myself. Not that I lost touch with Bowie during that era, because I didn't, but that was the era that I was probably less familiar with the work. So yeah, I think there's definitely a certain amount of the fact that that final album was so different, and regarded by many as his sort of magnum opus, or one of them perhaps, that has sort of served as a gateway for people to go back and say, well, let's see what else is interesting about this guy that we've kind of missed out on. And you mentioned Heathen there. That's a great album to go back and discover if you've not kept up with that period. And yeah, Earthling, there's some real great stuff there that's not so familiar to the general public.
Yeah, I get the sense that there was this, for a while, every album he came out with, somebody wrote about it as the best album since Scary Monsters, right?
Yeah.
Like that phrase became a joke. And it's as if he was in need of making a comeback several albums into his comeback, right? But with Blackstar, I think it was almost universally recognized as great. And here's my last question about that. You mentioned that while he was making the album, there was at least part of his mind that was thinking about the future. So to what extent is it an album about the process of dying?
It's really interesting that no one picked up really on the theme of death that we now look at, that seems to run through the album.
You mean no one else that worked on it?
Well, initially, critics, people that wrote about the album, even fans. If you look at the reviews that came out, remember that he died 2 days after the album came out. So there was a very short amount of time where people were writing about the album, and while he was still alive. And no, even though we look back at it and say there's a real theme of sort of death and endings, and sort of redemption and stuff throughout the album, nobody really picked up on that who was writing about it at the time. And in a way that seems strange. And then you could say, well, maybe there wasn't really much time to do that. But then if you think about the tracks that are on the album, how many of them have been already released before? Blackstar was, Lazarus was, Sue was.
Yeah.
I think there might be one other as well. I'm not quite sure, but certainly we'd heard a bit of that album before it came out. So there was time for people to sort of look at it and evaluate it. So that's kind of led me to think, well, is that just our retrospective idea of what it was, knowing what we now know about Bowie being so ill when he was making it? Well, then you can look back at other albums and see, well, can I find a sort of a thread about death and mortality throughout other albums. Yeah, you can find that in The Lad Insane. You can definitely, Knowledge Comes with Death's Release. You find it all over the body of work. What's different about, even if I look at Changes, when he's talking about the future, I still don't know what I was waiting for. The difference is with Blackstar is it's an old man looking back on life, as opposed to a young man in his earlier albums looking forward to death. And Bowie spoke quite a lot actually in interviews about his fear of death. I remember him being interviewed saying he doesn't mind growing old. I think he actually said, I feel pretty good actually. He was in his 50s at the time, maybe around the Reality era. He said, but it's the getting closer to death that I don't like. And it clearly was a bit of an issue for him personally. And yet this album kind of shows, I think, kind of an acceptance of just the way things are and the way they have to be.
Yeah. Well, we could talk all day about Blackstar. Let me pivot to your book.
So, okay, that'd be great.
Bowie the Collector, as of the moment that we are speaking, it is not yet out. I have pre-ordered my own copy, and
thank you very much.
If you don't run screaming from this interview after it concludes, I might ask you back once I've had a chance to read it. But I think it's still
be a great pleasure.
A few months out, right?
November the 21st. It's out.
Great. So I very much look forward to it. So tell us about the title, Bowie the Collector. Is this about his stamp collection, his butterfly collection?
Of course, he did that famous interview with Russell Harty in, I guess it must have been 1973, where he just says, I've always been a collector. I just tend to collect. I've always found I collect people, personalities. He said, I find within moments of meeting someone, I just adopt their accent. So, he was, and this kind of goes in what I was saying a minute ago about this sort of idea of artifice and just sort of collecting influences and ideas and completely repurposing them and putting them back out there as something completely transformed, completely new.
Yeah.
No one would say, oh, you stole that idea from there, you stole it from there. He'd literally just collect everything and put it out in a completely new way. And so the kind of focus of the book changed actually when I was talking to my publisher about it, because it started with, I started to think, well, I should write a book, because I would read David Bowie biographies, and I could see that the people that wrote the biographies had spoken to quite a lot of people who were, who worked with Bowie. And I started to think, well, I've probably spoken to just as many people as they have. Maybe I've got something to say about this, So I started thinking about a book that would be about the people who made Bowie. The influence that Carlos Alomar had, the influence that Reeves Gabrels had, and Gail Andorsi and so on. And I thought maybe there'll be a chapter about each person, what they brought to Bowie. And in discussion with the publisher, McNider and Gray, have been great with the book. They said, why not make it about not just the people that sort of they gave their talents to Bowie, but that Bowie sort of, give the agency to Bowie, and it's Bowie that collected all these things. And that's when it really sort of solidified what the focus of the book should be. So it's kind of about, what he took from people, what he took from culture, and the ways that he kind of, just sort of took different people's ideas and made them brand new.
So without having read the book, this might be an off-base question, but could you give an example of some of the influences that he collected and then synthesized into a piece of music that we might all be familiar with?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if I was thinking about a piece of music initially. The first one that came into my head was actually his first trip to Japan, where he saw Kabuki theatre.
Yeah.
And that just totally came out in all of his costumes on the Lad Insane tour, second part of the Ziggy Stardust tour. And I remember interviewing Willie Woodmansey about this, and he said, and he mentioned something I didn't understand it at the time. He said he mentioned something about the Bowie mask, and I kind of thought, what's that mean, the Bowie mask? And I knew that Bowie had a mask made during, I think it must have been The Man Who Fell to Earth, or one movie anyway. They had sort of a mask made. I thought, right, is he talking about that? But actually, he was talking about that sort of familiar gesture that Bowie does sometimes on stage, where he kind of puts his, the one where he puts his hands like that and makes it. And Woody says that he saw that in Kabuki Theatre and took the idea back to Bowie. And Bowie's like, yeah, great. You know, like the next night it would be in the show, you know.
Yeah.
Or maybe not the next night, but you know, pretty soon those influences were coming out. So yeah, it was really clear that at that point he was really collecting, you know, thoughts and anything that came his way. He
Yeah.
was kind of like, yeah, let's put that in, you know.
So that's interesting. I'll tell you the question that I did not anticipate asking, but you're talking about Bowie's output being the synthesized version of a lot of inputs that do not necessarily originate from within. And so that leads me to wonder, is David Bowie a character? So, and if he is a character, does he have to be played by David Jones? And, you know, is part of what you're doing in analyzing, chronicling, celebrating David Bowie, keeping this character alive and vibrant, much as somebody who is not Ian Fleming might do with a new James Bond novel, or who's not Arthur Conan Doyle might do with a new Sherlock Holmes movie?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Of course, Bowie was interviewed by Jeremy Paxman in 1999 or 2000, I think, in which Paxman asked him about the characters that he used to portray. And then Paxman says, of course, David Bowie himself is a character, to which Bowie said, yeah, absolutely right. So, Bowie himself regarded David Bowie as a character. And it's a really intriguing idea that you sort of mentioned there about, okay, so now we know he's a character.
Yeah.
You know, characters get, Sherlock Holmes is played by lots of actors. Can't David Bowie be played by lots of actors? So, yeah, and it's all artifice anyway. It's all theatre.
Right.
So, yeah, perhaps you or I could play David Bowie.
Well, perhaps you are, right? I mean, you are presenting concepts or thoughts that you are attributing to David Bowie, and some of the insights that you are providing did not exist while David Jones existed on the planet. So I you know, it's, to me, I asked this part, I'm not asking this to be philosophical, but I'm going back to that concept of why Bowie and why is there this continued fascination. And the other thing that occurs to me is, you know, I have this feature on my blog once a week. I choose a cover of the week, and I find there's never a shortage of covers that are posted on YouTube over the previous week, and some of them are horrific. And they're, you know, some people that read the feature are just appalled that anybody would, you know, try to cover a David Bowie song, but they don't have that reaction about Mozart, right? No. And or Cole Porter, right? And the concept that there's so much about his output, his concepts, his music, his art in general, that is still alive, and that you know, lives beyond David Robert Jones. And I think that's in part what you're doing. You're not a medieval monk preserving something that has no room to grow. I think that you're cultivating art, a concept, a way of thinking that didn't just end in January of 2016.
Yeah, that's so interesting. In fact, when we did the first convention in Liverpool, Uncut magazine, you know, quite a big magazine here in the UK, came along and did a feature about it, and their angle on it was the sort of not quite life after death, but how the sort of how the Bowie culture was continuing, you know, sort of independent of Bowie's input now. You know, it's kind of that sort of idea about how things continue. And something that you said a minute ago, I'm not quite sure what it was, made me think about what Bowie said about, I think in 1980 he did an interview with Andy Peebles for Radio 1, and he said in that that people interpret his work, and however they interpret it, that's up to them.
Yeah.
And they're anybody's interpretation is correct, and it's just as good as anybody else's, including his own, which kind of fits in with the sort of literary theories by Roland Barthes, who came up with the idea of the death of the author, that meaning originates in the reader or the consumer, not in the artist in the first place. So, and Bowie was really good at sort of tapping into the zeitgeist of all those kinds of things. So I'm not quite sure. I think I've lost the thread of the question now, but it's just
Yeah.
really interesting how he regarded everything as art, and that it wasn't him that was in control of the art. He was only in control of the creation. And then the meaning of it and what people made of it was entirely up to them. If they found something in it that he didn't know he put there, then that's great. They found it.
Yeah, I actually think that, right, you just nailed one of the things that I think is part of the reason that Bowie continues to inspire fascination, because there's so much for us to do, right? Read something, he's giving us something to play with or to contemplate.
Yeah.
I've been listening to Bowie daily for 40 years, and I still discover things in songs that I listen to over and over and over again.
And sometimes he did it consciously, didn't he? I mean, I've heard the story about the Bowie brothers when he came into the studio with the lyrics for that, and I think he said to Ken Scott or somebody, "Don't ask me what it means, but I'm basically giving them something to interpret.
Yeah.
Let's see what they make of this.
Yeah.
And you could write a book on that song alone, couldn't you?
Yeah. So something you said that inspires this question, then I'm just going to ask a couple more things. So you must be encountering new fans. And I often think about, for a new fan, everything exists all at once now. So when we were waiting for the next Bowie album, we were experiencing it as part of a sequence, which he's going downhill, or he's making a comeback, or I didn't like this period. But now, if you come to Bowie afresh, you could go from Space Oddity to Blackstar and skip over Let's Dance. It exists all at once.
Yeah.
How do you see new fans coming to David Bowie? Like, what do you see a pattern of what they think about him, or what is David Bowie, or what do they like, or what do they gravitate towards?
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. For a start, I've often thought, it's different for us having it revealed to us over a period of time, sequentially, to people who are new to it, encountering it as a body of work. And I often find younger fans really gravitate towards the Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane period. They learn. I mean, the visual imagery is stunning.
Yeah.
And I think if anything sort of stands out, if you're looking at the whole work from a distance, the visuals of that era combined with the sounds. The Aladdin Sane album just sounds, as fresh now, or as different now as it ever did, probably. I kind of tend to find that it's that era that brings people in.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to this sort of outsider idea, or the fact that it's okay to be a bit different, that attracts some fans, I think. And then, as you say, then where you go from there is so individual, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people sort of go on to maybe Low and think, well, how can the same artist make Low that made Hunky Dory, in just a few years? And of course, back then, if you bought Hunky Dory in 1971 and then you bought Low in 1977, that seemed like a really long period of time, those sort of 6 years.
Yeah.
Now 6 years doesn't seem like anything to me, but it seems like forever over there. And of course, artists, in those days had record contracts that required an album a year. And, I've kind of got a theory that that kind of leads to great work. You would think, wouldn't you, maybe that taking a long time over something would improve the quality of something. But, common wisdom holds really that period of the 70s, where he's putting out an album, sometimes 2 albums in a year, was, the quality of that period was just staggeringly high through the whole lot. You could almost take any track off any album, with only a few exceptions, and kind of say, like every track's a classic. So maybe there's something in sort of, you know, the pressure of all that leads to real creativity. But yeah, I think people pick their own journeys now, don't they? They sort of, you know, they have a starting point, and then as they discover Bowie, they can sort of take a journey through all sorts of different ways.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. This is great. Let me go back to David Bowie Glamour. Um, if somebody's watching this or listening to this and wanted to submit something, how would they do that? And if somebody's listening to this or watching this and wants to get a copy of the magazine, how would they do that?
Right. Well, they both go to the same place for both of those, which is davidbowieglamour.com. And then they can order the latest issue, which is the latest issue, issue 11, which is the one that you see behind you, was mailed out to people last Friday. So it's starting to arrive with people now. So yeah, you can go onto the website and order that. And there's also, even though we've committed to not reprinting any magazines, we still do have copies of issues 10, 9, and 8 available on there if they want those. And there aren't any copies of the books or of the earlier ones. And if they want to contribute, they can go onto that same website, and there's a tab that says something like, you know, submissions. And people can go on there, and it tells you what to do, and it's kind of got a few sort of guidelines as to what you might want to do and might not want to do, but none of it's prescriptive. You know, it kind of, you know, people always ask what sort of length article, and I kind of tend to say, well, look, we can get 500 words on a page. So if you want it to be a one-page article, write 500 words. You know, if you want it to be bigger, then write 1,000 words. Really just start at the beginning and write it and get to the end, and that's great. And if it's great, then we'll give it the space. But obviously, if you write shorter articles, we can fit in more of those because, you know, we only have a finite amount of space. But, you know, I'm really keen that people don't sort of put themselves off writing in or sending their stuff in because they think, oh, maybe my work's not good enough, or maybe it's too long, or maybe it's too short, or too whatever. And it's not about that. It's just like if you've got something great to say or something to add, or just a unique perspective, or even a similar perspective from, you know, that people can look at and say, yeah, I totally get that. That's me too. So yeah. But to answer the question, yeah, davidbowieglamour.com, and you can buy it from there, and you can submit through there as well.
I'll be sure to include a link on the blog.
Thank you.
So let me close by asking you a question that I ask everybody, which is, what is your favorite Bowie song and your favorite Bowie album?
And, you know, we were talking just before you pressed record, weren't we? And you said something that is so true, that somebody's favorite song, someone's favorite album today, it can be very, very different from what it is tomorrow or the next day. And isn't Bowie just so unique in that there isn't really even a consensus about what the greatest songs are? You know, if you ask that about Queen or the Police or almost anyone, you know, people would say, you know, yeah, it's Bohemian Rhapsody, and then it's this. But it's, you know, it's so diverse with Bowie. So I love, probably Scary Monsters is my favorite album.
Yeah.
And that's quite consistent, really. And I love Teenage Wildlife from that album.
Yeah.
I adore Slip Away.
Yeah.
Which was also called Uncle Floyd on the Toy album, and then on Heathen it's called Slip Away. I think that's just the greatest song. Dead Man Walking I love from Earthling. Yeah, I'm going to say, because you're going to ask me to nail it down to one.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say Teenage Wildlife.
I'll ask you the same question when you come back to talk about.
Yeah, it'll be completely different.
Yeah.
It'll still be Scary Monsters, I expect.
But by the way, that happens to be my favorite Bowie album too.
Is that right? Yeah, it's just fabulous. The amazing thing about it is, of course, it just seems so fresh and original, and it seems to have a sort of cohesive, sort of dystopian theme about it. And yet, so many of the ideas on that album were older ideas. That, you know, Scream Like a Baby was an old song. It's No Game. You know, one of them came from I'm a Laser. You know, another song he wrote when he was 16. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say Fashion's based on Golden Years, you know. So yeah, it's interesting how at that point of his career, Bowie the Collector, which is the title of my book, was beginning to collect from himself. You know, sort of collecting his own ideas and of course, Ashes to Ashes based on Space Odyssey. A lot of those, you know, a lot of old ideas are coming through, but yeah, it feels brand new.
Yeah, yeah. It's his best album since Scary Monsters.
It is. And you know what? I was talking to, I'm going to drop a name. I was talking to, there are not many people who are fans of David Bowie and Def Leppard at the same time. Right? But I am one of them. And I interviewed Joe Elliott from Def Leppard a while ago. He was a massive, massive Bowie fan. And I said, and his new album's Diamond Star Halo had just come out, which of course is taken from the T-Rex song. And I said to him that was his best album since Scary Monsters, which it's great. We just had a laugh about it.
Well, I'm going to reveal my ignorance, and I meant for this to be the end, but let me just ask you this: doesn't Def Leppard have a song that somewhat pays tribute to Bowie? I'm thinking of a video, and I can't think of the name of the song.
So it's called "Goodnight, Mr. Jones."
Okay. Yeah.
And it's actually not a Def Leppard song. It's from Joe Elliott's side project called Down and Outs.
Okay.
And so it's kind of in the vein because Ian Hunter did the song Dandy about Bowie, and it's kind of in the same vein as that. And Ian Hunter and Joe Elliott are great friends. So I think that was part of the influence for that song, as well as obviously the death of Bowie himself.
Yeah.
So yeah, and actually Joe is the biggest fan of Bowie I've probably ever met, including myself, as well as meeting him a few times. And Def Leppard and Joe himself have probably recorded about 30 Bowie songs on record over a career. So it's interesting. A band that you would think wouldn't be influenced by glam rock as a whole, and Bowie from that era really was.
Well,
how have we got onto Def Leppard? How did that happen?
I don't know.
It was me entirely. I blame myself.
No, I feel we're gonna wrap this up, but I feel like you've opened like 100 doors of topics to discuss. But I'm not going to do that to you. You've been so great with your time and sharing your thoughts with me. This has been terrific. I look forward to the book, and like I said, I will leave links in the post to David Bowie Glamour, the website, so people could order the or make a contribution if they want to. So, Nick Smart, thank you very, very much. This has been terrific. I look forward to things to come.
John, thank you. It's been terrific from my point of view. I can't believe an hour has gone that quickly, but I've had a great time chatting, and I really look forward to seeing it coming out and seeing all the other things you're doing in the Bowie world as well. Because it's all about all of us. You know, it's not just me keeping the thing going, is it? As you said, we're keeping the legacy going, but it's all of us. It's the whole fandom, and you're a massive part of that. So thanks for everything you do.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Bye for now.